Have you ever wondered just how corrupt a city can become? So corrupt that the heavens themselves can no longer tolerate it and must unleash a fury of fire to cleanse it from the face of the earth. Two names have echoed through millennia, becoming the ultimate bywords for sin and divine destruction in the human psyche: Sodom and Gomorrah. We've all heard the story, but was it just a biblical parable, a symbolic warning, or is there a terrifying truth behind the legend? A real-world apocalypse that history recorded in ash and bitter salt? Is there actual evidence that judgment truly fell from the sky in the form of fire and brimstone? In this audio journey, we will peel back the layers of mystery together. We will not only listen to what the Bible reveals, but also cross-reference it with what modern archaeology has unearthed, and explore the harrowing memories that the human eye could never forget. We will follow the path of a man named Lot, who fled a burning earthly hell and watched his own wife transform into a pillar of salt before his very eyes. And stay with us until the very end, because a truly astonishing secret awaits you. A discovery about what still exists today at the precise location where Sodom and Gomorrah once stood. A truth that could change how you see history, faith, and even our own future. But before we venture into the Valley of the Dead Sea, I want to know where you're listening from. Pause for a second and comment below. Tell me what city you're in and what time it is right where you are. It's fascinating to know that this ancient story is being heard simultaneously across all the world's time zones. Now, let's turn back the wheel of time. Before the destruction, there was abundance. Before the judgment, there was unimaginable pride. And before the fire fell from heaven, two cities flourished like jewels in the heart of a harsh desert. This was Sodom and Gomorrah. Imagine a land that the Bible describes as being like the garden of the Lord. Located in the Jordan River Plain, in a fertile region south of what we now know as the Dead Sea, these two cities were an oasis of life. This wasn't a barren wasteland, it was a valley well watered by the Jordan, making the vegetation lush and the pastures green. Their economy was incredibly prosperous. Caravans laden with goods, spices, and textiles bustled through the city gates. Their fields were always irrigated, yielding bountiful harvests. Their pens were full of fat livestock, and their people lived in a state of opulence that other regions could only dream of. From the outside, Sodom and Gomorrah were the very picture of progress and greatness. Their buildings were well built, their markets were a constant hum of commerce, and wealth was evident on every street corner. It was this glittering, promising facade that led Lot, the nephew of the patriarch Abraham, to choose this place as his home. After separating from Abraham because their flocks had grown too large for the land to support them both, Lot looked up and saw the whole plain of the Jordan, a verdant paradise before the Lord destroyed it. Lot chose for himself the best land in material terms. He saw an opportunity for wealth, a promising environment to raise his family and build his future, a place few dared to venture but which promised great rewards. However, Lot could never have imagined the spiritual price that this decision would demand. He saw only the fertility of the land, failing to recognize the barrenness of the souls who lived upon it. Because behind that prosperous exterior, a deep rot was eating away at the core. The book of Genesis describes it with concise but heavy words. The people of Sodom were wicked and were sinning greatly against the Lord. Their evil was not just in isolated acts. It had become embedded in the very culture, a societal norm. It was a society built on a foundation of extreme pride, boundless selfishness, insatiable carnal appetites, and a terrifying indifference to justice and the pain of others. In the book of the prophet Ezekiel, centuries later, God himself reveals the nature of Sodom's sin in greater detail. He doesn't just speak of debauchery, but emphasizes, "Now this was the sin of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters were arrogant, overfed, and unconcerned. They did not help the poor and needy." This is a profound diagnosis. Sodom's problem wasn't merely its sexual depravity, but its moral apathy. They had too much, yet they shared nothing. They lived in luxury, but turned a blind eye to the miserable at their very doorstep. Their arrogance wasn't just pride in their wealth. It was a self-satisfaction so complete that they believed they didn't need God, didn't need to follow any moral law. They were the law. Their justice was the will of the strong. Compassion was seen as weakness. Imagine a society where the cries of the poor are drowned out by the laughter of lavish feasts, where a stranger is not seen as an opportunity for hospitality, but as an object for exploitation or humiliation, where cruelty is considered entertainment. That was the toxic atmosphere that enveloped Sodom and Gomorrah. Wealth did not bring gratitude. It only bred arrogance and a sense of entitlement. The cry of injustice, of oppression, of violence rose from the earth and reached the very heavens. For a very long time, the story of Sodom and Gomorrah's destruction was considered by many, especially in secular academic circles, to be a mere allegory, a myth created for moral instruction. However, over the last century, the field of archaeology has begun to shed light on the dark corners of history, providing astonishing evidence. Excavations south of the Dead Sea at sites like Bab Ejdra and Numeira in Jordan have revealed the ruins of ancient Bronze Age cities, contemporaneous with the biblical timeline of Abraham and Lot. What archaeologists found was not a city that had slowly fallen into ruin. They found evidence of a sudden, cataclysmic, and unbelievably violent destruction event. Thick layers of ash, several feet deep in some places, collapsed city walls, completely incinerated buildings, and most chillingly, charred human skeletons found in contorted positions, as if death had come so swiftly they had no time to flee. The dating of these ruins places them around 2000 BC, perfectly matching the time frame of the biblical patriarchs. The strangest thing is the sheer scale of the devastation. In some excavations, scientists found pottery shards and mud bricks that had been vitrified. They had been superheated and turned to glass. To do this, they would have had to be exposed to an extreme temperature, estimated to be over 2,000 to 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit. No ordinary fire, whether a house fire or even a citywide conflagration, could generate such a terrifying temperature in ancient times. No natural explanation, like a volcano, as the region is not volcanic, or an earthquake, which doesn't generate melting heat, could account for this phenomenon. This has led to a shocking scientific hypothesis, an air burst event. Some scholars and scientists propose that a meteor or comet entered Earth's atmosphere and exploded directly over the Jordan River plain, an event similar to the Tunguska event in Siberia in 1908, but perhaps even more powerful. Such an explosion would have released energy equivalent to thousands of atomic bombs, creating a fireball of extreme temperature and a devastating shockwave, wiping out everything beneath it in an instant. This would have been followed by a rain of superheated material, including salt and sulfur from the ground and the meteor itself, blanketing everything in a deadly layer of ash. This hypothesis, astonishingly, aligns perfectly with the biblical description. Fire and sulfur rain down from the heavens. These discoveries not only bolster the historical reality of the Sodom and Gomorrah story, but also confirm that something truly catastrophic, a local-scale apocalypse, did happen in that region. Whether one calls it divine punishment or a cosmic event, the fact is that a civilization was wiped off the face of the earth in a single day. Yet, in the midst of that corrupt and rotten environment, there was one righteous man. Lot, despite living amidst depravity, tried to maintain his faith in God. He did not participate in their deeds, and his righteous soul, as the New Testament later describes, was tormented day after day by the lawless acts he saw around him. And God, in his justice and infinite mercy, determined that the righteous would not perish with the wicked. Because of this, a divine plan began to unfold. The outcry from Sodom had reached heaven, and the time of judgment had come. 2 special messengers were dispatched to the city. Their mission was crystal clear: to verify the extent of the sin, to rescue Lot and his family, and then to destroy what could no longer be saved. The sky over Sodom was already beginning to darken. The final night of the city of sin was near. As twilight fell, painting the desert sky in shades of blood orange, 2 strangers arrived at the city gate of Sodom. They carried no luggage, had no entourage, and no one knew where they came from. But they carried with them an unusual presence, an aura of authority and calm that disturbed the loud, chaotic atmosphere around them. They were no ordinary travelers. They were messengers from heaven, angels in human form, sent on a clear mission: to verify the outcry against Sodom and to signal its imminent destruction. At that moment, Lot was sitting at the city gate, a common place for elders and men of standing to socialize and judge disputes. Perhaps he was trying to catch a breath of fresh air, to escape the suffocating moral stench within the city walls. When he saw the 2 strangers, his instinct for hospitality and his reverence for men who looked distinguished immediately kicked in. He stood up at once, bowed low, and approached to welcome them. In an act of sincere hospitality, a precious virtue in the ancient Near East, but a scarce one in Sodom, Lot insisted they come to his home to spend the night. "My lords," he said, "please turn aside to your servant's house. You can wash your feet and spend the night, and then go on your way early in the morning." At first, the 2 visitors declined. They said they would spend the night in the city square. But Lot knew better than anyone the wickedness of this place. He knew that 2 strangers, handsome men, would become targets for the depraved and violent desires of the mob. A public square in Sodom at night was not a safe place. Fearing for their safety, Lot pleaded with them, insisting they come into his home. Finally, moved by Lot's earnestness, they agreed. Lot prepared a great feast for them, baking bread without yeast and serving them with the highest honor. Inside Lot's house, there was a brief moment of peace, an oasis of decency in an ocean of sin. But that peace did not last long. Before they had even gone to bed, a noise began to rise from outside. First whispers, then growing into shouts and the pounding of fists on the door. All the men of the city, from the youngest to the oldest, from every single neighborhood of Sodom, had surrounded the house. They had not come to say hello. They had come with a dark purpose. They beat on the door furiously and screamed a vile demand. "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us so that we can know them." The word "to know," yada in Hebrew, in this context is a clear and unmistakable euphemism for sexual violation, an act of gang rape and public humiliation. This was not a small group of hooligans. It was the men of the city, from every part of the city. This reveals the terrifying extent of the depravity. It had become a public sport, a mob thirsty for perversion, ready to assault and humiliate strangers in the home of their host, brazenly violating the most sacred law of hospitality. Faced with the rabid crowd, Lot did something brave yet utterly desperate. He went outside alone, closing the door behind him to protect his guests. He tried to appeal to whatever shred of reason or decency they might have left. "No, my friends," he begged, "don't do this wicked thing. They are my guests, and I have a duty to protect them." In an act of ultimate desperation, one that horrifies us today and is impossible to condone, but which reveals the depth of Lot's panic and the sanctity of hospitality in his culture, Lot even offered his own 2 virgin daughters to the mob. "Look," he said, "I have 2 daughters who have never known a man. Let me bring them out to you, and you can do what you like with them, but don't do anything to these men, for they have come under the protection of my roof." The offer is appalling, but it shows that Lot was willing to sacrifice his most precious possession to protect his guests. However, the crowd wasn't interested in women. Their desire was perverse and aimed only at the male strangers. They mocked Lot and roared, "Get out of our way! This fellow came here as a foreigner and now he wants to be our judge. We'll treat you worse than them." The mob surged forward, intending to break down the door and drag Lot out. Just as violence was about to erupt, just as all hope seemed lost, the two guests inside took action. They reached out their hands, swiftly pulled Lot back into the house, and slammed the door shut. Immediately after, a strange light flashed. The angels had acted. They struck the men swarming outside with blindness. Not a permanent blindness, but a temporary, confusing blindness. A visual distortion that made it impossible for them to find the entrance. Imagine the chaotic scene. An angry mob suddenly rendered helpless, screaming, fumbling around in vain, bumping into each other, stumbling, unable to find the very door they were trying to break down moments before. The city had crossed every line. The patience of God was exhausted. This final test had proven that there was not a shred of righteousness left in the community. This was the irrefutable evidence the angels needed. That very night, with the chaos of the blinded mob outside, the terrifying truth was revealed inside. The angels told Lot the real reason for their visit. "We are going to destroy this place," they declared. "The outcry to the Lord against its people is so great that he has sent us to destroy it. Do you have anyone else here? Sons-in-law, sons or daughters, or anyone else in the city who belongs to you? Get them out of here." Lot trembled. He knew this was not an empty threat. It was an unchangeable decree. He immediately ran to find his future sons-in-law, the men betrothed to his daughters, and warned them with desperate urgency, "Hurry and get out of this place, because the Lord is about to destroy the city." But what did they do? They laughed at him. They thought their future father-in-law was joking, or perhaps had lost his mind. Their complacency and disbelief were too great. They could not imagine that their prosperous world was about to end. They had rejected their final chance for salvation. Meanwhile, dawn was approaching. The sky in the east began to lighten, but it did not bring the light of hope, but the light of judgment. The sky had a strange, heavy, menacing color, different from any other day. Sodom's time had run out. At first light, the angels urged Lot, "Hurry, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, or you will be swept away when the city is punished." But Lot still hesitated. His heart was torn. His entire life was there, his home, his possessions, his relationships, his memories. To leave meant to abandon it all. This human hesitation is understandable, but in that moment, it could have been fatal. The angels did not allow his indecision to condemn his family. They seized his hand, his wife's hand, and the hands of his 2 daughters and led them away, practically dragging them out of the city. The Bible records a moving detail, for the Lord was merciful to him. Even in the midst of the wrath of judgment, God's mercy was being expressed. Once they were outside the city, one of the angels gave the final, urgent, and absolute command: "Flee for your lives, don't look back, and don't stop anywhere in the plain. Flee to the mountains or you will be swept away." Sodom's doomsday clock had just struck 0. In the next moment, the first sparks of divine judgment would begin to fall. The dawn sky was no longer the pink of a new day, but had turned a sickly yellow, the color of sulfur, and then darkened ominously. Lot, his wife, and their 2 daughters, led by the angels out of the boundary of death, began the flight of their lives. They walked quickly, hearts pounding in their chests, heavy with the sorrow of loss, but also filled with terror at what was about to happen. Their eyes were fixed on the mountains in the distance, the sole objective for survival. The command was crystal clear: flee and do not look back. There was no time for goodbyes, no chance to pack possessions, no room for late regrets. Everything they had ever known, ever built, ever loved, was about to be obliterated. The patience of God was exhausted, and divine justice had to be served. As they moved away from the city, Lot, in his panic, begged the angels for a concession. He was afraid he couldn't make it all the way to the distant mountains in time. He saw a small city nearby and pleaded, "Please don't make me flee to the mountains. I might not make it, and this disaster will overtake me and I'll die. Look, here is a town near enough to run to, and it is small. Let me flee to it. It is very small, isn't it? Then my life will be spared." That town was called Zoar, meaning small or insignificant. And once again, out of immense mercy, his request was granted. The angel replied, "Very well, I will grant this request too. I will not overthrow the town you speak of, but flee there quickly, because I cannot do anything until you reach it." So, the very moment Lot and his family set foot inside the safe threshold of Zoar, the heavens tore open. The Bible describes this scene with words that are brief but devastatingly powerful. Then the Lord rained down burning sulfur on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of the heavens. This was no ordinary rain. Imagine fireballs, burning chunks of sulfur, pouring down like a relentless storm. The sky became a giant furnace. The air was thick with the choking smell of burning brimstone. The hiss of the fire, the explosions as buildings collapsed, and likely the horrific screams of thousands of people being incinerated, all merged into a symphony of destruction. The devastation wasn't limited to Sodom and Gomorrah. It swept across the entire plain, consuming all the surrounding cities and all the vegetation. The hills shook. The wind burned like a blast furnace. The earth itself seemed to groan under the fury of the Lord. This was not a partial destruction, it was total, it was absolute. Everything was consumed. The strong houses, the accumulated wealth, the green fields, the animals, and all the inhabitants, men, women, and children. Nothing escaped. Even the memory of a prosperous civilization was buried under a thick layer of ash. But in the midst of that terrifying escape, a personal tragedy occurred, one that has become an eternal warning. Lot's wife, who had been with him all the way, whose hand had been held by an angel and pulled from the city, disobeyed the divine command. She looked back. It was not a casual, curious glance. It was a look of longing, of regret, of an unbreakable attachment. Perhaps in that moment her heart sank. She thought of her beautiful home, her friends, the luxurious life she was losing. She could not accept the reality that it was all over. That look was an act of disobedience, a silent resistance to God's judgment, a choice to set her heart on the material world that was being destroyed rather than on the salvation that lay ahead. And the consequence was immediate. As she turned to look, her body was transformed. Perhaps the superheated rain of salt and minerals enveloped her, or perhaps a supernatural force acted upon her. The Bible simply states, "She became a pillar of salt." There, in the desolate wilderness, she stood frozen, silent, a tragic monument, an eternal warning to all who hesitate between life and destruction, to all who love a sinful world more than the promise of deliverance. Lot and his two daughters, perhaps hearing her choked-off scream, did not dare to stop. Shaken to their core but driven by fear, they continued forward. They reached Zoar, but even there, they did not feel safe. Perhaps they feared the people of Zoar would also become hostile, or that the destruction might spread. Eventually, they left Zoar and took refuge in a cave in the mountains. There, alone, bereaved, and the sole survivors of a collapsed world, they witnessed the end of an era. The Bible does not romanticize the details. It doesn't just recount a physical disaster, but lays bare the moral bankruptcy of a civilization that had rejected everything just, good, and holy. Later, the patriarch Abraham himself, from his place in the highlands, rose early in the morning and looked toward Sodom and Gomorrah, toward all the land of the plain. And what he saw was a horrifying sight. A dense column of smoke rose from the land, like the smoke from a massive furnace. The entire fertile valley was now a sea of fire and smoke. It was as if the very ground had been incinerated to its core. The judgment of God had been executed in its fullness. The story does not end with a victory celebration. It ends in silence, in ashes, and in traumatic memory. Lot was saved, but everything he knew, everything he owned, and his own wife were destroyed. He was now a landless foreigner, a survivor carrying a story that would become an iconic, eternal warning for all of humanity. Because Sodom and Gomorrah were not just ancient cities, they became a mirror, a reflection of what happens to any society, any world that rejects justice and mercy and inevitably walks toward its own destruction. The fire from heaven was extinguished, but the burning questions remain. Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed by fire and sulfur from the Lord out of the heavens. For centuries, this story resonated as a powerful symbol of God's judgment. But with the rise of science and archaeology, we are no longer reliant on faith alone. We can search for the physical fingerprints. Is there evidence on the ground that can corroborate the biblical account? As mentioned, south of the Dead Sea, in a desolate region covered with salt and sulfur, lie the ruins of ancient cities. Archaeological sites like Bab Ejdra and Numera, believed by many scholars to be Sodom and Gomorrah or their neighboring cities in the circle of the plain, have revealed structures destroyed with sudden, intense violence. Mud bricks fired into pottery, charred skeletons, and a thick layer of ash covering everything. This indicates the cities were not gradually abandoned, but met with a catastrophic event that wiped them from history in a single day. However, the most stunning discoveries have come from another site, located north of the Dead Sea in Jordan. The site is called Tal el-Hammam. A team of scientists and archaeologists spent years excavating there, and what they found sent shockwaves through the international scientific community. Tal el-Hammam was a massive Bronze Age city, far larger than contemporaries like Jericho or Jerusalem. It thrived for thousands of years, and then around 1650 BC, or 3,600 years ago, it was utterly annihilated in an instant. The scientists, a team including archaeologists, geologists, chemists, physicists, and cosmic impact experts, published their findings in prestigious scientific journals like Nature Scientific Reports. They concluded that Tal el-Hammam and the surrounding area were destroyed by a meteoric airburst, an event similar to Tunguska but occurring over a populated area. The evidence they presented is staggering. They found a destruction layer about 5 feet thick. Within this layer, they discovered, first, pottery shards with their outer surfaces melted into glass, while their interiors remained intact. This indicates they were exposed to an extremely high heat blast, over 4,000 Januf, but for a very short duration. Second, shocked quartz, grains of quartz whose crystal structure had been deformed by immense pressure, a telltale sign of a cosmic impact or explosion. Third, tiny spherical particles of iron and silica, along with melted metals like platinum and iridium, elements that are rare on Earth's surface but common in asteroids. Fourth, melted mud bricks and soil samples, and a directional pattern of destruction, indicating a shockwave had swept through from a specific direction. And finally, an extremely high concentration of salt in the destruction layer, suggesting the blast may have vaporized a large portion of the Dead Sea's salty water and rained it down across the landscape, rendering the soil infertile for centuries afterward. All this evidence paints a terrifying picture. A rocky celestial body, perhaps 150 feet wide, entered the atmosphere at tens of thousands of miles per hour. It exploded a few miles above the ground, unleashing energy thousands of times more powerful than the Hiroshima atomic bomb. The fireball instantly incinerated everything. Seconds later, the shockwave hit, flattening the 12-story palace and every other structure. None of the city's 8,000 inhabitants and tens of thousands more in the surrounding area could have survived. What is so incredible is how this scientific scenario uncannily mirrors the biblical account. An explosion from above, from the heavens, creating intense fire, and a rain of superheated salty material, brimstone and salt. The event not only destroyed the city, but rendered the entire fertile valley uninhabitable for about 600 years, a detail also confirmed by archaeologists. While the scientists do not claim this was definitively God's punishment, they acknowledge that the terrifying memory of a real, cataclysmic event like this could absolutely have been passed down through generations and recorded in the book of Genesis. For a person of faith, this is no coincidence. It is the fingerprint of God in history, a confirmation that He can use the very laws of nature, the forces of the cosmos, to carry out His will and His judgment. Furthermore, the very existence of the Dead Sea is a silent testimony. It is the lowest point on the surface of the earth, with water so dense and salty that no complex life can survive in it. Everything here bears the mark of death, of sterility. It is as if nature itself still carries a deep scar from that divine sentence thousands of years ago. In the New Testament, the story of Sodom and Gomorrah is not forgotten. Jesus Christ Himself referred to these cities multiple times, not as a myth, but as a real historical event. He said that on the day of judgment, it would be more bearable for Sodom than for the cities that rejected His message. The Apostle Peter also wrote that God condemned the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah by burning them to ashes and made them an example of what is going to happen to the ungodly. Therefore, their destruction is not just an event of the past, it is a warning for the future. Sodom and Gomorrah became the eternal symbols of what happens when humanity defies its Creator, when society rejects justice, when it scoffs at mercy. They were judged by fire, but their warning legacy continues to burn to this day. The fire that fell from the sky didn't just consume the earth, it marked history, it marked the Bible, it marked science, and it continues to mark our conscience, because the God who judged Sodom remains the same. So, where is Sodom today? If you visit the region around the Dead Sea, you step into another world, a world of heavy silence, of desolate and deadly beauty. The air is thick. The ground is cracked, covered in a white crust of salt. There are no birds singing, no green of life. What was once the garden of the Lord is now one of the most inhospitable places on the planet. Visitors to the area can see massive formations of rock salt, eroded by wind and rain into bizarre shapes that resemble petrified human figures. One of the most famous of these pillars, overlooking the Dead Sea, is known by local tradition as Lot's wife. While there is no archaeological proof that this is the exact pillar from the biblical account, the image stands as a stark, haunting visual reminder of a story that is still very much alive. It reminds us of the price of hesitation, of a heart still attached to a world under judgment. And the archaeological expeditions continue. Layer by layer, the earth is peeled back, revealing more fragments of the incinerated civilization, melted materials, destroyed structures, and irrefutable proof that something horrific, whether supernatural or naturally unexplainable, happened in that region. These are not just legends told around a campfire. They are traces, they are evidence, they are open wounds in a land that was once called a garden, but is now sterile. But perhaps the most important question isn't, where is Sodom on a map? The truly urgent question for our generation is the spirit of Sodom being reborn in our world today? Jesus, when speaking of the end times before His return, made a frightening comparison. He said that period would be like the days of Lot. He described a society completely absorbed in the routines of life, oblivious to the coming judgment. People were eating and drinking, buying and selling, planting and building, he said. But the day Lot left Sodom, fire and sulfur rained down from heaven and destroyed them all. The greatest lesson of Sodom and Gomorrah is this: God's judgment can seem far away until the moment it arrives. Sin can seem normal, even celebrated and accepted by society, until the price becomes unbearable. God's mercy can seem infinite, but His patience has a limit. Sodom was destroyed not just for specific acts, but for an attitude. They rejected truth. They mocked holiness. They embraced evil, selfishness, and apathy as a way of life. And that is the warning that echoes across millennia to reach us today. In a world where human pride seems to know no bounds, where wealth often goes hand in hand with indifference, and where solid moral values are often dismissed as outdated. But amidst the darkness of the warning, there is also a message of hope. Lot was saved. He hesitated. He was imperfect, but he was taken out. He was protected because there was one righteous man in that city. And God never abandons the righteous to die with the wicked. He always provides a way of escape. This is the choice that every person, every generation must face. To look forward to salvation or to look back in regret. To flee from destruction or to remain in a condemned world. Sodom is not just a city of the past. It is a mirror of the present, and perhaps a shadow of the future. The choice is ours. The story of Sodom and Gomorrah, of Lot and his family, is not some distant fairy tale. It is a profound reminder that our actions have consequences, that righteousness matters, and that God's mercy is always available to those who seek it. It challenges us to look at our own society, and more importantly, to look into our own hearts and ask, on what foundation am I building my life? The solid rock of truth or the shifting sands of compromise? Our journey through the ashen streets of Sodom and Gomorrah comes to an end here. We have seen prosperity, sin, judgment, and mercy. We have seen the fire from heaven and the evidence left on the earth. This story is not just about destruction, but about choice. The choice between life and death, between running forward and looking back. If you've listened this far, I believe this message has resonated with you. Thank you for joining me on this exploration. If stories like this, mysteries hidden in the Bible and illuminated by science, spark curiosity and faith within you, then don't hesitate. Hit that subscribe button for Bible Retold and turn on notifications. That way, you won't miss any of our future journeys as we continue to unveil the great truths that have shaped our world. Please share this video with those you care about, because truth needs to be proclaimed and hope needs to be spread. Once again, thank you for listening. Until next time.